Welcome to Thinking Deeply about Primary Education, the podcast that makes time and space to think about pedagogy, teaching and learning, professional development, anything of interest to time poor but enthusiasm rich primary teachers. This week, I'm joined by Kate Frood. Hi, Kate. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
It's great to have you on the podcast, a fellow mathematics enthusiast. We're going to explore we're going to explore mathematics in greater detail. I think this is your first time on the podcast. Do you want to introduce yourself, Kate, and let everybody know where you're from and what you're about?
Yeah, sure. I'm just saying to Kieran, I'm technically retired after sort of 40 years in school. That was 2.5 years ago. My whole career has been in central London, primarily in Camden, where I've had two headships. And in between the two headships, when my children were little, I was a numeracy consultant in the heydays of the National Numeracy Strategy, working in Islington. And my second headship, where I was for 18 years, Eleanor Palmer in Camden, we were a national teaching school, and I guess became quite a specialist along the way in that role in primary maths. And actually, I think something I'm proud of, actually, but I also did it for my pure self-indulgence and pleasure. I always taught right up to the last week of my second headship. I taught maths problem solving twice a week to years 5 and 6. And sort of Miss Frood maths was just kind of part of the school culture, really. And all the sort of spin-offs of loving maths that came with that for the staff and the kids. So I'm currently in Camden still primarily, and I do the early career teachers. We do quite an enriched programme in Camden, well beyond the statutory provision. So I have about 35 lovely primary ECTs. We meet up pretty much weekly. It's a big part of my role now.
Fantastic. I mean, it's great to hear that you were teaching the whole way up to the end because there's nothing quite like being in the classroom to keep you grounded. I think.
No, and actually, I've got many sort of friends, ex-colleagues who've gone on to headship, and my big mantra was school leaders have to be connected to the classroom. It's on every level, but as I said earlier, it's not just to be a sort of savior or a sort of a martyr. It's actually because it's the best bit of the job. And if you forget what it's like to just be with those brilliant young people, the rest of the job, that's the bit that gets you down. It's actually the kids that keep you sane. So yeah, no, I all my colleagues and friends who are still in school, that's a big part of what I encourage them to do.
Nice. Never a truer word spoken. That's the bit that keeps you sane. So we're going to focus our attention on mathematics. Makes total sense. And I suppose one of the questions I ask everyone who comes on to speak specifically about this subject is why is a high quality mathematics education so important?
Which is a wonderful question, and actually, I suppose two responses from me. The first would be, if we do nothing else, for goodness sake, at primary, we have to get kids to be lifelong readers who love it, and we have to create, I think, lifelong mathematicians. And the two aspects to that is absolute fluency. Really, I felt incredibly uncompromising about that. Automaticity is vital. So that's your kind of maths is a helpful thing. But the other thing I think, if you have a high quality primary maths education, it's actually the attitudinal stuff. And it's about, I don't know, it's about problem solving, loving puzzles and patterns and logic and connections. And I think those are real life skills in terms of being in the workplace, being part of a team, those kind of problem solvings that you do, possibly going into gaming. I know the secondary school that most of our kids went to loved our kids because they said they just had such resilience and perseverance. And I felt proud because that came from our real culture of doing lots of problem solving, where they didn't want to know the answer, they wanted to finish. And I think all that kind of mindset is critical. And looking back at my own primary education, because it was the 60s and it was all a bit bats probably, but I remember really clearly we did a subject called tools. And I mean, I don't think I knew what it was at the time. And now I look back and I'm like, oh, brilliant. So the teacher would come in with this tool bag, just a bit of a prop, and that was our fluency lessons. So we did really kind of uncompromising fluency. But then my maths lessons were things like Fibonacci, Pascal's triangle, circle patterns, digit patterns, tessellation, and probably all a bit fey for this day and age. But actually, what it gave me was that love of mathematics as a kind of pattern connected world, and I got a real pleasure in it all. And I think also, lots of I love Sudoku and all those kind of things now, and I've got friends who love all those kind of codey games. And I'm not geeky as such, but I think, why shouldn't we, just as we create kids who love to sit and read for hours and hours, we should encourage kids to have that mindset. I love card games, just spent a week playing them in wet Wales. I think that lots of children I see thrive and flourish when they're allowed to love mathsy things. So I think it's that double-edged thing, really. It's absolutely unequivocally know your number facts, so you've got those life skills to cope with it all. But it's also that kind of mindset of mathematical mindset, which I think is a great gift.
And do you think it was this combination of the fundamentals being in place and opening people's eyes to what mathematics can be? Is that what improved their
Definitely.
attitudes?
Without question, I think we presented maths as something that was fun, engaging, magical, and just something just something that you enjoyed. And I don't know, I think maths can be presented, and parents don't help sometimes, that it's this kind of difficult subject and all this Rishi Sunak, everyone must do A level. Really? I don't think I subscribe to that particularly, because with that comes the whole notion of you earn more money if you do maths A level. I think I'm more interested in encouraging them not to be frightened of it, and to see it as this, they go to secondary school and they're like, oh, hi, yeah, I met you before, binary sequence, know about you, not threatened, not worried. Oh, fractions, yeah. I think we need to give that real sense of just control and connection. Really important.
It's that lack of control that they feel whenever they're exploring things like ratio in secondary school, and they realize, oh no, we're not prepared for this.
But you see, ratio, fractions, area, perimeter, double it. It's just times tables. The gift of knowing your tables opens, so many. I am such a fan of the Year 4 tables test, which may be controversial, accepting all the stuff about rote learning. If they're taught well with understanding and kind of, if I know this, what else do I know? Going into Year 5 with those times tables at your fingertips, you are so on it. You can do pretty much everything then. If you're having to still calculate whilst doing long multiplication, 7 sixes, you're still working it out. You're not doing the computation. You're still stuck with that recall. So we were doing 100 question times tables tests in Year 4 decades before it became statutory. It was this massive kind of gateway point for me of non-negotiables.
I did two pilots and one real check, and you could see the 6 seconds they'd given was around about the time that it takes you to count on your fingers. And the pupils who were counting on their fingers, I mean, certainly in the first year of the first pilot, which was during the pandemic, I think, you could see them run out of time, and you're like, okay, this is a really well chosen number. I think my only issue with it is that it seems to be turning into an accountability thing, which they promised us it wouldn't become, because schools don't seem to get the results back, but there's a figure of how many people's got 100%. So I think some work needs to be done on what because it was meant to be here are your pupils in Year 5 who don't know their times tables, etc., and which times tables they don't know, but that hasn't really materialized. I don't know if you've seen anything different to that.
Well, that's interesting, because actually, of course, it started in COVID. So when I retired in 2021, so I don't know the details anymore. But you don't get the actual children's individual results back.
You get the number, but you don't get the times tables. So it's meant to be a diagnostic, or it was sold as a diagnostic. So you get, oh, this child got 24, but as far as I could tell, you don't get told which one. If that makes sense.
I always felt with the SATs, the day of the SATs, me and the teacher would sit there. We knew exactly, almost to the score, what kids would get. If you've rehearsed them well, if you've which ones they know and they don't know. I think if you've taught well and you're teaching for understanding and you're constantly assessing, that shouldn't be a problem. I think the 6 seconds is brilliant. And on all the practice stuff that's out there, I say to teachers, you can adapt. You're only going to have a go, but using your 10s and your 5s. You can maybe only try 10 practice questions, but never, ever give them more time than 6 seconds. I don't know where that came from. I assume some research, but you're absolutely right. The kids realizing 6 seconds is quite a long time. If you know 4 5s, 20, that was 1 second. So it's very liberating to make them realize it's quite a long time. But if you ask 17 13s, it will take you longer than 6 seconds. You're calculating then, aren't you? It's not that automaticity. So, yeah.
We would tell our kids, you've got time to think of the answer, put it in, and then consider it. You've maybe got another 3 seconds. So I think you're absolutely right.
Don't press enter. Don't press enter.
Yeah, oh because obviously they try to get it as fast as possible, and well, I'm glad we did the pilot because we realized no, you guys cannot be treating this like a game. Please stop trying to race through. If you had to condense your approach to the teaching of mathematics into a set of guiding principles, what would they be?
So I think the first one, one of our phrases we used a lot, my deputy Natalie and I, in our training was, you can't think about what you don't know. I'm all for reasoning and problem solving, but you've got to have that knowledge underneath it. So I think fluency, that's just an absolute, right through the school, that's got to be really embedded. I think secondly, taking the long view about maths, I think, and I loved the Ofsted report in July. I thought it was brilliant. Lots to celebrate, but some really good, even better riffs. And I totally agree that we tend to over-resource year 6 because of the pressures of accountability. I get it. And actually it is all about foundations. That historical problem of the kind of nursery teacher not joining an inset. Oh, I don't do maths. Yes, you do. You want strong mathematicians in the early years, as I was lucky to have, because that cumulative disfluency. You see kids moving through the system who don't really know what a number is. And because of the system now, which is so laden with worksheets, it's very easy then to just kind of complete things and never be exposed. So I think the work NCETM have done about, or NCETM, about counting, just brilliant unpicking of those incredibly important foundations. So something about a really clear understanding of what those, and at the end of Key Stage 1, number facts, place value, doubling and halving, models and images, get them locked in. A third principle would be is that planning is a thinking process. It's not a photocopying process. I think the glorious days of the math specialist course that I know you did, the numeracy strategy with the compulsory inset days, I think subject knowledge is still for many teachers an issue. So I think creating, the principle that you need to understand what you're teaching. And I think there's some very good material out there, that short video intros to units. But that thinking process means that you look at the whole unit. What are we teaching? What's the big idea? What have I got to make sure everybody understands? I worry that now teaching can become the next slide set, rather than that kind of like daily reflection. And then the fourth one, and I still feel a bit flattened by some people when I mention enjoyment. You've got to have a core principle in your school that children at my school are going to love maths. And if you have to be the crazy maths lead who wears dice earrings or whatever it takes, be that person, so that they cheer when it's maths. They look forward to maths. There's so much research about anxiety. Anxiety causes low achievement. Low achievement causes anxiety. So I think the children must enjoy it, and the teachers must enjoy it, and the parents too. We did a lot of work, got parents very keen on maths. But again, certainly in the early career framework, there's lots of slides that say things like, just because children have enjoyed a task does not mean they have learned anything. And we have to make the point to the ECTs that it's all about what they remember. I fundamentally think if you enjoy something and think about something, you remember it. So yes, of course, have that clarity on the knowledge and the outcome. But if you can wrap that into something where there's laughter and smiley faces, we're winning. I think that I worry hugely, again, with the way the current materials are structured out there, that the reasoning tasks are often at the end of these daily sheets. And so they become the preserve of the fast finishers, who tend to be the, high prioritainers. And, we know, just as we know in reading, yes, phonics has been an incredible success, but that's the sort of fluency of reading. Anyone who's taught year 6, those great writers are the ones who read prolifically, that higher order thinking. And I think in maths too, if we all children must access reasoning and problem solving activities. And I don't mean a complex task around enrich, which is Mecca in my book. Just simple little activities, putting 3 numbers on the board, which is the odd one out, and give me your reason. You might say 3 is the odd one out because it's the only number less than 10. I might say 12 is the odd one out because it's the only factor of 48. Whatever. That's not true, is it? But whatever. Where there's open-ended tasks where children can all be thinking and reasoning and articulating. And I think because of this intensely overcrowded curriculum, far too crowded. Don't get me started on the whole curriculum. It's gone mad. We are not secondary schools. But even in maths, there's too much subject knowledge and not enough time is given or allowed or created for that applied. What we used to call in the olden days AT1, Attainment Target 1, using and applying. I'm a massive, enormous, huge fan of misconceptions and the centrality of, again, it goes back to subject knowledge, anticipating those misconceptions, jumping on them when they happen. And long before Doug Lemov wrote A Culture of Error, I was saying good mistake, so that children made that classic error and you'd stop the class and go, oh, Asim, can I borrow that mistake? That's such a good one. Everybody, can you just look at what Asim did? Who else made that mistake? Oh, well done, Asim. Give him a clap. That whole culture that's how we learn. We learn by making mistakes. And again, working with teachers, bits of work I do, not looking at that whole unit and seeing those kind of moments that are going to come up where those mistakes will happen and being ready to kind of stop the class and anticipate them. And I suppose my last principle would be, I don't like a silent maths classroom. I just think we need to be talking and thinking and sharing, trying to solve things together. Of course, there are times that kind of, practice at that point of just having learned something when you want them to be heads down a bit. But I worry that silent classrooms are somehow seen as better in some schools, and that worries me. So those are probably my principles, I guess.
Lots of those, if you tie them together, essentially come down to the skill of the teacher.
Yes.
And both the pedagogical and subject knowledge. If we take your own schools, for instance, as an example, how would you support teachers in getting to that point where they can operate on this level? Because what you're describing is like operating on a really high level of practice. What would you do to support them to get there?
Well, that's a really good question, because I totally accept now we have a different landscape, and I think things like podcasts are fantastic, and I think I'm told that there's an amazing resource sharing on Twitter and everything like that, and I can see that. I'm afraid, being a bit old school, I became a better teacher by watching teachers and by allowing those teachers to watch me. And so I was very, as I said earlier, when I went and taught these lessons in my school, the teachers didn't leave the room; they stayed in with me. And it was just they were allowed that sometimes they watched the learning because I was holding the reins, and we'd always have that quick conversation in the morning about why don't you take your prior high attainers for once, I used to give that teacher permission to have the space to do that, and perhaps I would sort of be more aware of those who needed more support. So I hope that the pendulum swings a bit. I worry that a lot of senior leaders see their role as checking for completion and coverage and book looks, and to me, the most use I could be with my what became a specialist understanding, despite my B at O level and whatever, I felt the greatest use I could be was to be in classrooms. Now, that doesn't have to be the head. I'm not trying to be some hero. It might be the maths lead. And certainly I love the NCTM hub model, and I chair a local board now, actually, and I'm going on Friday to watch one of the specialists in action, and I know we'll watch him teach a lesson, and those kind of models, really. But I worry that I've always said, it's one of my oldest lines, teaching is about people and relationships, and I think we've just got to hang on to that and remember that the teacher is the most important thing, and that the intervention. So yeah, as much as possible, I would say the best use of any time you get as a maths lead or as a head deputy is to be in a classroom and not sitting with a spreadsheet I just there never really did that. um, and then secondly, we would have, I mean, staff meet. We would do a lot of maths as a staff. We had a whole series of maths staff meetings. We'd rotate where we held them, and that the host teacher would start with a good maths game they'd found, or a good resource, a picture book, whatever. But keeping that emphasis on practice. And now with my early career teachers, I see one of my big gifts I can give them is to share all my ideas and but critically to do them. And we know when we were a teaching school, we ran a lot of subject knowledge courses and trying to recreate the MAST course. And it was watching those teachers spend 5 days doing maths, watching the transformation when they were afforded that space and time to do it. Was fantastic, so I think that's probably a bit of a way in which we do it. And lots of, I mean, I had this phrase, did I make it up? I don't even remember. We talked about parrot on the shoulder coaching. So rather than sitting at the back as a school leader with a clipboard ticking off what teachers had done, as an observer, me and my deputy would be very much part of the lesson. And if things were going awry, rather than noting, teacher fails to supervise high attainers who have finished task, I might go over to the teacher and say, I think they're ready for you to go over there. So kind of live coaching, if you like. And then I remember a head teacher colleague saying to me, well, but that means the lesson's better than it might have been. And I'm like, oh, what a sin. I mean, if I'm helping the teacher to improve, aren't we all winning? The kids certainly are. How awful if I sit and watch them fail and then give them feedback after. So I suppose that would be my culture, I suppose. So things like now another thing that's on trend, instructional coaching. I think coaching and that kind of, I believe in you and I believe you can become a better teacher, was just always kind of how I led.
The understanding that that default position is that everyone can be a really good teacher who wants to. I think John Mason might have written that in a book called about noticing. Your starting point is that you have to want to get better, and then from there anyone can really.
Absolutely. And you never stop. And actually, I really, really vivid thing for me is I taught during lockdown. I don't know, one of the lockdowns or other, I found myself teaching year 6 remotely, doing live lessons remotely. My God, I had, 39 years under my belt. I massively improved because I had to teach so clearly because I had one shot at it. I couldn't teach and then go over to help, Louis or whatever. I had to be so clear that Louis could then do it on his own at home. And the kind of, I just improved. I just absolutely thought about micro instructions in my delivery. So I think the minute you think you've nailed it, or the minute you start being lazy and shortcutting, no good. But then you have to be in a school where there's a culture where, that's valued.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed that's becoming more the norm, but we'll
I
see.
think so. I feel hopeful that, I mean, maybe it's because we've got, I don't think things are going to change nationally, but I think we need to mutiny slightly about curriculum content and asserting more what matters. If we're going to do our job as primary teachers better, I think we've just been told to become mini secondary schools, and I just think we're not doing anything well enough because we're trying to do it's a mile wide. Someone else said this? Curriculum has become a mile wide and an inch deep, and that's not okay.
No, it's certainly a very complex time. I mean, I could spend several hours talking about the maths curriculum and the direction I would take it, but perhaps we'll save that for another time. In reference to the principles outlined, what might these look like in practice in a school that you think was doing a particularly good job of teaching mathematics?
So I think there would be a really clear plan from reception right up to year 6 about what fluency matters when, and actually quizzing is part of that. It's just normal. It's not a big scary test. We quiz in our school, and the kids know that's how it helps you remember. So I'm still quite surprised on my travels that I go into schools where they don't have times tables quizzes. Low stakes, mark them yourself with a green pen, handed in at the end, whatever. But really, it's so important, and that recall is part of learning it. So that would be something I would expect to see. Secondly, I would want the school to have an intelligent approach to using resources. I mean, I don't want to sound like a real old bag, but there was nothing when I started. I mean, apart from no photocopiers, no computers. I had a book called Maths Adventure, and I had the Nuffield books, I think. There was nothing. There is now too many resources. So I think, absolutely have your core spiny scheme in your school, but I'd want to see that that was being used intelligently, that teachers were expected and confident to adapt those materials, to look at the big picture and to work out which bits mattered, and not just to see it as lesson by lesson by lesson. I'd want to hear teachers talking about maths. I'd want to hear them saying, oh, I found this really good thing, or whatever, sharing resources. And then in the lesson, it's funny, I was doing a session for the ECTs and I was prepping, and there was a slide on something called assertive monitoring. And I'm like, oh, aye, what's this? That's a new term for me. And when I read what it was, I'm like, oh, that's teaching. And it said teachers should work the room, leaning over shoulders, asking questions. So I would want to see teachers doing exactly that. Once the modelling and the teaching had happened, I would really want to see teachers working the room and knowing the children, because that's what it's all about. We had a phrase we had, I think stolen from George Berwick, called teachable moments. The principle was the closer you are to the child, the more learning takes place. If you're at home marking, they've gone home miserable because they didn't get it, waste of time. So, really that culture of being live and moving around the room. I would want, this is controversial, I don't know. I completely embrace this term adaptive teaching. I understand all the reservations about differentiation and the idea that things are predetermined. However, having been through mastery in the late 70s, early 80s, and I think there are children in your class for whom you have to dial it back when it comes to independent practice. There are children in your class who deserve some real challenge at that point. So when it gets to the part of the lesson where children are doing their independent, deliberate practice, I just can't see how you can't be adapting at that point. I noticed in the Ofsted report in July, it talked about task completion taking precedence over teaching for understanding. And I think that's a lethal mutation, an unintended consequence of this emphasis on scheme material. So I would want to see teachers acknowledging where children were at and meeting their needs. Absolutely whole class modelling, absolutely I do, we do. Nobody taken out, nobody sitting on a separate table with a loud TA, everyone together. But when it gets to that Wednesday lesson, or however you do it, that you've got that different thing. I would want a really strong commitment in the school that we're committed to reasoning and problem solving and asking questions and thinking and delighting in things that we can't do for everybody, and not assuming it's the preserve of the prior high attainers or the fast finishers. And I would want to see games being played. Some fantastic books we created in Camden, working action research in schools. Nat and I, literally invented games and shared them across all our schools. And they were used for kind of year 2 interventions, I suppose. But actually, every child in my school could tell you how to play swappy strips, caterpillar chants, don't roll a 6, Sprod. We had a whole collection of games. And critically, and they still do this, I know, once a month after the bell on a Friday, parents stay in class, in every class, even nursery, and they play a maths game alongside their child that the kids already know. And so, just that laughter around maths and realizing the power that if you want to win a game, God, you think quickly. You recall those, you roll in a dice game, there's a heck of a lot more motivation and speed than a worksheet. So we had a huge commitment to games, not as an add-on, but very much embedded in the teaching. That's probably all the things I do. And practice, I think, again, crowded curriculum. And again, the way these created schemes work, I don't think there's enough time given to practice. And I think sometimes practice is seen as an activity, whereas for me, it should be assessment. If I'm giving you practice about when those zeros come in the tens column in subtraction, you're not getting it. So I need to stop you practicing that because that's pointless, and I need to reteach it to you. And oh, you're getting it really quickly, so let's move you on a bit. So I think something about having a really clear notion of what's the point of practice, and how you do it effectively is important.
I think you'll probably be more familiar with the materials than I am. I mean, you definitely will be. What is it about the section on adaptive teaching that makes you think there's not, or what is it that worries you? Because my reading of it is the key points are basically, they look like they're designed to address some serious misconceptions that we've held as a profession, and here's some things that we shouldn't be differentiating 6 ways. Is there no scope for pushing pupils on and supporting pupils in your class? I don't know, because that's a genuine
Yeah.
question.
Okay. So I think first of all, you're right. I don't know where this notion came from that we planned 6 different maths lessons. I mean, I never did. Um, but I also never expected my child with an EHCP and moderate learning difficulties to do the same work as my extraordinarily able, whatever. I never did. But I also never, I think we sometimes we create our own issues. I think teachers dined out on saying, I've got this many special needs in my class. So I think there's this mantra that goes with the mastery approach, which is keeping the class working together. We're in an elevator, not on an escalator, preserving difference. And I applaud that. And it's great for anybody who's taught nursery, certainly in my inner London experience. You get 3-year-olds coming in who want to talk to you about thousands, and you have 3-year-olds coming in who don't know what 2 is. So it's not just the schools created those differences. We are inheriting children who have very, very different experiences of number. And if you keep the class working together, the danger is, and this is why in my experience mastery failed before, the ceiling was too low. It was playing to the lowest common denominator. So adaptive teaching, as I teach it now to the ECTs, is about how do you scaffold the task, how do you in the moment, so I think the really brilliant thing about it is differentiation implies that you've done it before it starts, and that's set. Adaptive teaching is there's adaptation at the point of planning, there's adaptation within the lesson, then absolutely not enough of this goes on. There's adaptation after the lesson, that kind of critical time after school where you're like, well, that bombed, didn't it? So tomorrow I am certainly not moving on. We are going back and we're going to do halves again. So I think there's brilliant material in there about what does that adaptation look like. It doesn't have to mean creating something completely different. But I still see too many teachers interpreting it for ease, for fear of compliance from leaders. I don't know. Everyone's doing this. I mean, everyone is just doing the same sheet. And I see then you get this culture then that are fast finishers because it's too easy for many of them. And you get this fixed mindset of I never get to the other side because I never get to turn. And certainly the materials that I see a lot of, the interesting, the juicy, lovely reasoning questions are kind of towards the end of each of those daily units, and they're not being taught, and they're not being extracted and taught as a kind of separate whole class thing. So I think I certainly on my travels give permission to teachers and parent. I have friends who are parents, grandparents. He's bored, she's bored. I hear that more than I used to, because possibly in their schools they're not being allowed to thrive. And we should be excited about kids who love maths and who find challenges. But then I also see if you don't create challenge for those children, they themselves don't develop the right mindset. And when you do present them, as I have, with something that's really challenging or difficult, they give up. And they're a bit indignant because they can't do it quickly. So that's the mindset they're going to need for secondary and A level and beyond. So I think all children have to struggle to get, and that's the culture you want to create.
So in January, Kate, you published a book, the A to Z, depending on where you are in the world, of primary mathematics. I ask all my guests this question. Everyone who comes on who's written a book. Why does the world need this book?
Well, I didn't. I mean, I didn't kind of plan to do it. I did get asked to do it, which was very nice. And I found it incredibly easy to do. I don't mean to sound arrogant. I locked myself away without the internet, and I just wrote. Because actually, when you've taught maths for as long as I have, and you've led maths and a school for as long as I have, I kind of feel what I say comes from a place of, yep, done it, know it, I know this works, I know this works. And whilst I absolutely love debating education, and I'm a great reader of blogs, and I love going to research ed and all those things, I do think sometimes, I'm going to upset some people here, but experience does count hugely. And I think we've got a lot of expertise out there, people who tell us how to do it in very simple, clear ways. And I think I feel very authentic. I feel like I might be telling you how to do it, but my God, I've done it. So I think what this book adds to the party, and I hope that comes through in the voice and then in the narrative, is I speak from a place of great passion and enthusiasm, but also great experience. So I think if you do buy the book, I was pleased with the format, because you don't have to read all of it. You can just pick up any chapter you like. So P is for pattern, G is for games, L is for lesson, M is for misconceptions. You could just pick up one chapter and read it. And again, because I know busy teachers need that injection of ideas and practical advice, I have sort of soaked it in all my things that have worked for me, games that have worked, tricks that have worked, routines that have worked, and sort of CPD things I've done that have worked. So I know from some of the feedback I'm getting from people who I've worked with in real life, they're kind of like, oh, I've got Kate in my pocket. So I hope that's what it is, a really practical book that you don't read once, that you kind of carry around with you. And obviously your book, very much so. But I'm not sure there are that many about primary. I mean, I'll happily read, Emma McRae's book and Craig Barton's. I'll read secondary maths books. And I think we've got a lot. Those are both great books. But I don't think there's many of us who've written about primary.
Certainly not recently, because obviously you mentioned Hellock's books, which are almost your gold standard. But it's been a while, hasn't it? Because if they were on the essential reading list when I was training, I would imagine they've been there for a while. Were there any letters that you thought, oh, I just need something to add this, or did you have them all mapped out in your mind to start with?
The one everybody teased me about was X and Y. So what are you going to do for X and Y and Z? I knew straight away X. I thought, well, what I'll do for X is I will do X. I will do algebra, because algebra is so out there as something to intimidate children with, or for a bright child to say, oh, I do algebra with my dad. Algebra starts in the nursery when you cover a piece of pneumacon up with a piece of cloth. So I wanted to really give teachers the confidence to understand, and the kids, more importantly, algebra starts in the nursery. It's not something to be frightened of in year 6 when a weird floating X thing comes in. Oh yeah, we've done that. It was a bag in year 2. It was a B in year 4. So X was easy. And then Y, because I just love teaching problem solving, and I love it when children go, yes, when they get it. So I just thought Y was for yes. And Z got a bit erudite. I did 0. I wish now I'd done ZPD for Zone of Proximal Development, because I adore Vygotsky and I think he's my hero. But that comes into questioning. So he got in the book massively. But I did 0 because I think it's one of those things that is really interesting in maths. And I think if you make it interesting for children, a bit of a history of 0 and things, that and they're not so nervous about it when it pops up.
Any letter game you play, those are the tricky ones. So having those already mapped out is, you're ahead of the game. Any plans for a follow up?
Do you know? Because if you've been a teacher and a head teacher as long as me, and I know there are people out there who are just amazingly big out there. I've never been somebody who's kind of created I would love, the biggest question I get asked on my travels is, where did you get your ideas? And you see, part of the answer is, well, when I started teaching, there wasn't any. So you had to go to every Maths Association conference and tear out every puzzle from the paper. So I've got upstairs just meters and meters of lesson ideas. And lots are taken from Enrich and adapted from Enrich and other things. And I would love to put together a really supportive, sequence. I understand how we work these days. I'd love to put together a sequence for each year group of problem solving and reasoning lessons, so that in year one, start with this, do this, then do this, to really help teachers who haven't got the time that I don't know, I found I had. Yeah, I had, because we did not have the curriculum pressures in my day. I think that would be a really supportive resource, because it's one thing telling teachers to do more, but it's then supporting them to become excited and to really understand these activities.
I think you should do an implementation book. Take all the
Implement.
things you talked to me about today and then really drag,
Well,
that's
yeah,
what we need.
I'm open to offers, people. Yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah. See if John Catter going for a 3-book deal now. I mean, it's been wonderful talking to you today, Kate. We could have gone for much longer if time constraints weren't in place. Do you have any final advice for teachers who feel energized and ready to up their mathematics game having listened to this chat?
Oh gosh, yeah, because I was thinking, I am very privileged being in Camden. For whatever reason, we have no breakout academies. We're still a family of schools. And I'd say one thing is, seek out a maths community. We have a very strong primary maths community in Camden. We meet regularly. Natalie and I led a lot of action research across our schools. So I think NCTM hubs can be those places, but seek out a community of mathematicians, and then within that community or within your schools, do more maths, and do some fantastic stuff out there, problem solving, and that you can have real fun card games. So I think creating that kind of doing maths community is important. When I started, we had the William Tyndale Maths Centre in the ILEA in London. It was a whole centre, and all it did, and it had staff, permanent staff. You would go there after school and they go, "Oh, hello, would you like to do the milk bottles problem?" I was just surrounded by people who made maths playful and engaging. That would be a dream job. I don't think it's going to be funded. So I think, yeah, find the community, do more maths. Something that actually I think was really formative for us as well was we got into doing national maths competitions with the kids. So the UKMT, which is really a secondary thing, United Kingdom Maths Trust, and the Primary Maths Challenge and the First Maths Challenge. So that was all. We didn't pick who did it. We knew who might do well, but hey, it was a very inclusive event. But actually, that really developed our resources of good ideas for problem solving, because there's some great stuff in those questions, really good practice materials on their websites. It gave maths a status. It gave problem solving and reasoning a status. That was a big thing that really enhanced our maths teaching, I have to say. And when I do go into schools now that are quite ahead in their maths teaching, that's, I'd say, a good next step for them is to do that. And the pride, I mean, God, we had year 5 children get into the Olympiad level, which is, just sensational. And to have a child in your school who was revered for that, alongside kids who were revered for their football, I thought we've won. If maths is held in such high esteem that you want to be like Luz, then we're winning. And the other thing is, I don't know, this is just a personal thing, really. Don't leave the classroom. I think I've got a bit of a crusade to lead on trying to avert the sort of leaving the classroom, because I think we need. Experienced teachers are just so precious, and I was lucky to hang on to mine. And I look at those teachers in my school who'd worked for 12, 13, 14 years, and they were just wonderful to coach the youngsters, wonderful in their knowledge of the curriculum and the kids. So I kind of feel like, I hope that, I feel they're not a group that's been looked after. Yes, we've got the MPQs now. Yeah, just like treasuring those people who I think we need to keep in schools to inspire the next generation.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, I'm working on a piece at the minute about the potential for the master teacher, because one of our big things was, you got to make staying in the classroom a viable option for people, But when you do, you see the benefits of it, because then they become your coaches, like you mentioned at the start and things. So I could not agree more.
We tried, haven't we? We had ASTs, and then we had lead practitioners. But where those worked, when we first became a teaching school, we sort of interviewed and appointed across Camden what I suppose we call them lead maths teachers, and quite a lot of them were maths teachers. And then others, we would put a kind of timetable of, you come and watch Natalie teach, year 5 fractions, and then teachers from other schools would come and watch. It was, what's happened to that model? Is it just the pressure of supply teachers? Is it the pressure of the curriculum? Is it because, why that was better CPD than a lot of other stuff that's out there, watching. And then the way we would structure it was, you'd watch the lesson and then you'd sit and have a cup of tea and deconstruct the lesson. It's a kind of like micro version of what they do every week in Singapore, isn't it? But it really worked. And that, as I say, listen, Ruth Mertens was a parent in my first class just by fluke, the woman who wrote Hamilton and Abacus. I mean, she started me off. I mean, what a gift. She'd say, "Oh, I'm pregnant, I'm on maternity leave, I'll come and help you in your class." And she, there she was, right from the get-go. I had an expert kind of, coaching, improving my teaching.
Well, that's what we're going to discuss next time, Kate. We're going to discuss the master teacher and what we can do to get the system back on track.
I'm in a campaign with you there. It's people, not paper. We've got to kind of get that. Yeah.
People, not paper. Yep, that's the hashtag for it as well. That's excellent. Yeah, you get a career in marketing whenever you really retire. All I said to do is say thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much.
And everyone at home, until next time, thanks for listening.